All right, we've gone over phone cameras. We've gone over compact cameras and bridge cameras. Now, this is the exciting part. These are the cameras that everybody thinks of when they think of a professional photographer. Mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, right? So, I've got a DSLR here. I've been referencing it, and we're going to get into this. We're going to talk a lot more about DSLRs here in a minute. But first, mirrorless cameras. Let's dive right into them. We're talking about mirrorless cameras. Now, a lot of people are confused on the terms. They're wondering why this is called a mirrorless camera and a DSLR is a DSLR. So let's go into the differences real quick. Let's talk about DSLRs first, because having a mirror and without a mirror, DSLRs basically have a mirror. Mirrorless ones don't. But what is that mirror and where does it play a role in this? So if we're looking at a camera, we'll pretend that this is a beautifully drawn camera and a lens here, and then we've got the sensor here, we've got the end of the lens here. Here's your little subject here. He'll be a little cowboy because, equine photo school, might as well, right? And then we have this little eyepiece here that we can, look into. This is called the viewfinder. And then here's your eyeball here, right? Beautiful eye. So the light bounces off your subject and heads into the lens. And through this lens, it runs through a couple of pieces of glass here, depending on the lens, everything's different. And then what happens when it gets past the lens, it hits a mirror. And this mirror is going to reflect that light up here into this little chamber here where there's another mirror, and that bounces it out towards your eyeball right here. So this is a DSLR, a DSLR. And that's how DSLRs basically function. When you press the shutter button, this mirror flips up, and then that light is exposed to the sensor, or the sensor is exposed to the light, and then it takes the picture. Your shutter comes down, all these things happen, you get a picture, right? That's what happens. Now, in a mirrorless camera, you have a similar looking camera. Things look the same. You still have an eyepiece here. You've still got a front element on your lens, and then you've got some elements inside the lens, and you still have a sensor. Now, the difference here is that when you're taking a picture of your little cowboy here, the light comes in like normal through the lens here, right? And sound effects included, and then it goes through all the different pieces of glass in your lens, because lenses are still made similar for each camera. They just have a different mount. And then it hits directly onto your sensor. There's no mirror in the way. So the way that it gets up here to the viewfinder is a lot different. It has to go hits the sensor, and then from the sensor it goes into a little computer, and it processes it, and then it transfers it up here to a screen that is in this viewfinder, and then you are looking at the screen here with your little eyeball. Whoops, that was a terrible eyeball. Anyway, your eyeball here with your lashes and your colored in. So that light has to come in here, hit the sensor, be processed by the computer, and then shown to you on this screen, or a lot of people end up just looking at the screen on the back. So you can look at either one. DSLRs also have a screen on the back, but typically people are using the viewfinder to look at your images. So this leads us to one of our negatives about mirrorless cameras, is that the light coming in on a DSLR comes in at the speed of light. It hits these mirrors at the speed of light and hits your eyeballs at the speed of light. So it doesn't slow down at all on human standards, right? If you study physics, you might be able to determine that this does slow down a tiny little bit, but it's not. As far as humans are concerned, it's not slower. So that light's coming in here at speed of light and hitting your eyeball at the speed of light, and then this mirror flips up to take the picture. When it's ready, when you're ready to push the button, take the picture, the mirror flips up. There's almost no delay whatsoever, and boom, you get a picture. Now there is a little bit of timing delay because the mirror has to flip up and that sort of a thing, but you have much more delay in your timing and what's going on in real life. So that light is coming in here at the speed of light, but once it hits the sensor, then it has to be processed by this little bitty computer that's in your camera before it's shown on one of these screens, and then you push the button, and then you're already kind of behind the times here. So these mirrorless cameras have a little bit of a delay built into them because of that. But either way, this is just like the general functioning, high-level overview of how these two different cameras work. Now, let's get into our positives and negatives on mirrorless cameras next. Okay, our first positive here, we've got positives. We got number one, interchangeable lenses. This is huge. We haven't had that yet in our discussions on cameras. None of those cameras we've talked about, besides being able to clip some on to your camera phone, have had interchangeable lenses. So this is huge. That means that you can literally, this is a DSLR, but bear with me here, you can literally take these apart and you got a lens and a camera, they're separate. You can upgrade, you can change lenses, you can upgrade your body and keep your lenses. There's a lot of different things that you can do here, and it just is a really cool feature of mirrorless and DSLRs. We're going to get into them next, but interchangeable lenses, it's huge. You change your whole perspective, a whole different shot. You want different shots, you get different lenses for different purposes. It's huge, huge deal. Lets you upgrade your body. The second thing is number two, JPEG, which they all have been able to shoot JPEG so far, but you also now have the ability to capture RAW files. Now RAW files are huge. These are basically all of the actual real data that the lens brings in, all the light that the lens brings in, all the detail, all the everything. This is the RAW. The RAW file has all of your color data. It has lots and lots of data, tremendous amount. These are roughly 3 times bigger file size than a JPEG, which you might think is a negative, but it's a positive because when you're editing these, you have much more flexibility. You have more ability to change the photograph without getting too into the weeds here on exactly what a RAW file is. This is, you know, we're just getting our feet wet here, but you've heard of RAW files, you've heard of JPEGs. We're going to get into the difference and exactly why you choose one over the other at any given time. It's not always, some people preach, only shoot RAW, ever, never ever shoot JPEG. And I beg to differ. I've got some reasons why you'd want to shoot JPEG in a minute. We're going to get into that in this video series that we're working on here. But just for the purpose of where we're at now, when you grab a mirrorless, you've bumped up to interchangeable lenses, you get to shoot RAW. 2 very important things. Now, number 3 on our pros list. This is also a big one here, and we've got full on manual mode. So you get to take full control of your photographs. You get to control your aperture, ISO, shutter speed, all of the things. You can clip on accessories onto here like flashes, remote controls, all kinds of cool stuff. There's lots of accessories for your mirrorless cameras. Now, let's get into a few negatives. Negative numero uno is the delay. Now, there is a slight delay like we talked about because that light has to come in, hit the sensor, be processed by the computer, and then shown to you. So there's always like a little bit of delay versus real time, what's actually going on in front of you. So a lot of you guys are here because you want to shoot rodeo. You want to shoot action and sports and have all this cool stuff going on. That's very fast, very precise. When we go to time out a shot, we need very precision timing. Very important. Makes or breaks you as a photographer, so that delay can be quite rough. Now, that said, I want to preface this by saying technology is increasing rapidly. Now, older mirrorless cameras, no way. I would not even think to have one. You know, even like 2-3 years ago, there was no way. I wasn't getting a mirrorless camera. As technology progresses, that delay minimizes. And then there's even some cameras now that are like kind of recording as you go. So if you press that button, you can actually revert just a second, you know, maybe not a full second, but a fraction of time backwards to when you actually did press the button, and it can grab that shot too. There's some really cool stuff that they can do with this technology. So yeah, this is kind of a negative right now, but we're working out of it very quickly. So I wouldn't really put a lot of weight into that negative. Very small, not really a big deal, right? And then number two, our like second negative here, is the battery life. Now, why do I say that? Because mirrorless cameras have a lot going on. They have a screen that is in the viewfinder, a little bitty one, but still a screen. And then some people are using them like this, where they're holding the camera out here and they're looking at it on this big screen on the back. Either way, those screens take up a lot of juice. Plus, anytime that camera's on and it's receiving information and then showing that information, it's processing it, that takes a lot of power. So those little batteries have to, you know, work extra hard. Where this, on a DSLR, you've just got the mirror. When it's down, like this thing is pretty much, it could just be to sleep and you could still look through here and see a picture, and, you know, because it's just mirrors and they don't take any electricity. So when these are on and running for hours and hours and hours and hours, they don't drain the battery very much over a long period of time. But on a mirrorless camera, you have all of this stuff that has to be on for it to even function at all. We're filming on a mirrorless camera here, and it's a wonderful tool. I really love it, don't get me wrong, but that battery life does suffer. This one, you know, I've got an extra battery right here, so pretty soon I'm gonna swap batteries out because we've been filming for a while now, and that battery just, it tanks pretty quickly. Now, you can do some things like add an accessory onto the bottom where you can have a dual battery pack. You can have two batteries stuck in there at the same time, but it makes your equipment bigger. And part of the, you know, one of these positives here that we didn't list, it's kind of the fourth kind of positive here, is that these are fairly light and fairly nimble. You know, they're not like a compact camera, but they're a lot less hefty and bulky than these bad boys are. So when we, you know, when we get down here to battery life, yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks, but the batteries are small and the camera is small, and like that's good. So it's kind of a plus, kind of a negative, whatever. So the third thing, our third little drawback, is autofocus. Now, some cameras are getting really good. There's some Sony cameras out there that are phenomenal. There's a couple of Canon models that are really pushing the envelope here on this autofocus. But from my experience, from the experience of others online that I've, you know, been interacting with a little bit, autofocus is still like, it's still a little slow, you know, front to back. There are some really cool things that autofocus does. We'll kind of put them over here, but we've got eye detection and face detection, and some of them, not all of them, but some of these cameras even have an animal detection. So what that means is if you can, you know, like we're this far away, it's going to do face detection, right? It's going to detect my whole face. But if I was moving closer, or I had a longer lens and this was cropped tighter on my face, it would pinpoint my eye and it would just focus on, you know, whichever eye was closer. So if I was standing like this, it would focus on this eye, right? If I'm straight on, it might pick both of them. You know, we'll see, depending on that plane of field, that, you know, depth of field, your plane of focus. So your face and eye detection just kind of depend on how close the subject is or how zoomed in it is. And then this animal detection, super cool. So some of them have ones for like dogs and cats and you know, like house animals, but some of them will do horses too. So that's really cool. You might check that out, and that's a big plus. That's a huge positive. So this autofocus, albeit slow, it does have some tricks up its sleeve. So, you know, it's not a total negative, but it's just a little bit, we should just put slow right here. It's just a little slow for me, for my liking. I personally, the way I use these, I'm going really fast and I'm switching. Say I'm at a team roping, I'm switching from the headshot boom, and then the heel shot is over here. I grab a different focal point with a different trigger button on the front, and it switches to a different autofocus point, and it needs to very rapidly switch to a different person, and that focus needs to get from here to here very, very fast. And I just find that mirrorless cameras kind of lag a little bit there now, but this technology is catching up with us fast. So these DSLR guys, if you've been shooting with a DSLR for any period of time, we're going to talk about this in a second, but they're on their way out. Spoiler alert. So that's it. That's it for mirrorless cameras. Let's get into DSLRs next. Alright, next on our list is the good old DSLR. This is probably what you think of when you think of a professional camera in most cases. Now mirrorless cameras, like I just talked about, they're catching up really, really fast. Anyway, I have a DSLR here. This is a 5D series from Canon. Very nice camera. This one's a little bit on the older side, and I've paired it with a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. We're going to get into lenses a little bit later. Just stick with me here. But these, like we talked about, they have a lens in there that reflects up and back and into your eye. So these are very, very handy that way. Let's get into some positives here real quick while we're on the subject. So number one, our very first big time positive is the same as the mirrorless cameras. They have an interchangeable lens. Interchangeable, we know what this is. Lens, we just talked about that and all the awesome things that come with an interchangeable lens. You've got lens choices, and that is huge, guys. I think a lot of people underestimate. Everybody wants the sexy new body that just came out, right? They're thinking, man, I gotta get this body, and it's so important. It's not that important. I don't upgrade bodies near as much. Like, I have way more lenses than I have camera bodies. Lenses, that's super important. Light's super important. Bodies are, yeah, they're up there. It's cool to have a body, a nice one. All right, number two on the list. And now we've discussed JPEG and RAW already on the mirrorless cameras, so I won't go into it again here. Later on in this series, we are going to do a whole video on JPEG versus RAW and all that. So stay tuned for that. Number three, the big pro here, speed. These focus, let's just put focusing speed. Focus speed is huge on these. If you shoot sports and you have a 1D series or a D6 or whatever, the pro bodies from these manufacturers, Nikon, Canon, they're big flagship pro bodies. They are wicked, wicked fast. They are just straight speed demons. When you focus on something, it is there. You can't even hardly perceive that it focuses. It's so fast. It's really nice, and that is a huge plus. All right, let's get into some of the minuses. One minus that we have here is they are big and bulky. So they're big and bulky. I'm shooting on my mirrorless camera right now, and I only have one, but these can be quite large. This is substantial. Even the smaller DSLR vastly outweighs that same exact mirrorless camera. So with the same sensor size and same lens, the DSLR is a lot heavier, and it's bulky. These are they're just big. They have to have room for that mirror in there. They got to have room for all this stuff. As you can see, this big top piece here where that top mirror sits in there, quite large. You just have a much bigger, bulkier body overall. And then that leads to having bigger lenses and the whole thing. So they're big, they're bulky. That's kind of a drag. Not a huge drag if you're like me, and my style of shooting is on a tripod with a gimbal head, and it kind of just free floats there, and it doesn't matter how much that weighs. That thing could weigh 50 pounds. I wouldn't care. I pack it in, I pack it out, but otherwise I'm not holding it. I'm not taking that weight personally, so it just doesn't matter how much it weighs. So it's not a negative in my book for the most part. It sucks packing it around. It sucks having a whole big Pelican case. I got one as big as this table, and it's full of cameras and lenses and stuff like that, and it's heavy. You know, it's about 40 grand worth of stuff, and it weighs a lot, you know, like a full-size human packing around. So they are big and bulky, and that's why mirrorless cameras are on the rise. Like, they're cool. So if you just compared to a mirrorless camera. Here's the next thing, the number 2, they are being discontinued. So just like film cameras, right? Like, we're just phasing these out. Manufacturers are stopping making lenses, they're stopping making bodies. They're on their way out. They're not completely out. You can still get some new DSLRs if you know, go to your local camera shop. But this is kind of a positive too. If you think about it, if you are a DSLR shooter now and you already have this gear and it's still working fine, you have a bunch of lenses, you can pick up some bodies that are cheap. You can say, hey, guess what? These are discontinued. A lot of people are saying, oh, this is discontinued, so I have to get rid of my stuff right away and upgrade to you know, the latest mirrorless camera. And so they'll ditch this stuff that's barely used just because, you know, something new came out. So you can get these bodies and lenses and stuff for pretty dang cheap on eBay and other marketplaces like that, just because people get scared because, you know, they look too far into the future and say, well, these are being discontinued, so I better get rid of mine. I don't want to be a dinosaur. But if you're already there and you already have the stuff, it might not make sense for you to just jump ship right away, and it might make sense to say, hey, I just had my 70 to 200 lens just broke and I need a new one, so boom, you go and find yourself a good solid used one, lightly used, and it's a fraction of the price, and you didn't have to change your whole system over because of that. So it's okay. You know, there's always a silver lining, if you will. But these are, I'm not even going to go into a third one here. Now that they're being discontinued, it doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a deal. If you're out shopping for a camera and you haven't bought one yet, you're just excited to learn a little bit first, don't even buy a DSLR. I would just say at this point, just go mirrorless and just start there, because the mount is different for the lenses, and once you get into the whole system, you know, like we talked about earlier, these are in the systems category. So if you are like me and you've got, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in camera gear, and you're not just, you know, ready to just throw money away on money, you know, so that's why I don't want people to just invest heavily on something that's being discontinued. So go with a mirrorless camera. You're gonna love it, and just you're gonna be with that system for a long time, because mirrorless is where the future is going, and the future is, well, now, I guess. So that's it.